Ja, nu ska ni få höra olika saker om Kina. Författarinnan skrev vilda svanar som har sålts i miljoner, översatts till massor med språk. Den handlade om Jung Changs uppväxt i Maos Kina. Men nu har hon kommit med en annan bok som heter Den sista kejsarinnan av Kina. En helt ny bild av en kvinna som ofta har beskrivits som en ren häxa. Hon plockar nu fram betydligt mer mänskliga drag hos den här kvinnan. Men vi ska börja att titta på hur kvinnor har lidit i Kina. Det handlar alltså om så kallade lotusfötter. Den här skon som jag visar upp här tillhörde författarinnans mormor. Det är alltså en vuxen sko. Lotusfötter handlar om att man binder fötter. Nu ska ni få se här hur man lindar hårt fötterna från de är små barn, de här flickorna. Och vi ska varna lite grann för den bild som kommer när den här kvinnan har tagit av sig sin linda. Så här märklig ser alltså foten ut. Och det här är ju en slags tortyr av kvinnor som miljoner av kvinnor har varit tvungna att underkasta sig i Kina. Nu ska ni få lyssna på den intervju jag gjorde med Jung Chang som berättar om kejsarinnan som faktiskt var den som satte stopp för så kallade lotusfötter. Welcome to my show.
Thank you for having me. Yes.
You have been writing a book that is it's changing totally the official picture of the last empress of China. Mm-hmm. And it's not sort of a witch or a very mean and dark person. You kind of paint up a totally different picture of this person.
Yes, well, I did 6 years of research of the archives that are open. So there are imperial decrees, court documents, correspondence, and everything. And the picture that I learned from these archive documents was that far from being this sort of despot, conservative, as you say, I mean, she actually was the founder of modern China. She brought a medieval China into the modern age.
But this is a totally new picture.
It is totally new. I mean, that's why it's exciting to me. But it's the true picture. In fact, I sort of suspected a little bit that she wasn't the picture she has always been painting.
It's a fascinating story. I think a lot of people have seen the movie The Last Emperor with a little 5-year-old child, or was he
even younger?
Even younger, 3 years old or something. He's sitting on the throne, and behind there is this yellow cloth, sort of. And behind that is this woman that you are portraiting.
Oh, yes. Well, I think the film, I mean, she only appeared for a minute. I mean, of course, she was painted as the received wisdom had her. And of course, the films take liberties, poetic liberties. I mean, she was not like that. She was not a witch as was the portrait. She was an extraordinary stateswoman. She ruled China on and off, mainly on, for 47 years. And she transformed a medieval empire into sort of modern society.
Let's take a few details, because we have pictures, and you can describe where, because she had to hide from men. So let's see, she's sitting, there is this throne. This picture, for instance.
Right, okay, yes. Well, you see, if you go to the Forbidden City, you'll see this room. This was the audience room where Empress Dowager Cixi conducted state affairs. I mean, in China at the time, we're talking about the mid-19th century, men and women were strictly segregated. So she wasn't allowed to see her official, who are all male. So she would be sitting behind the yellow screen, and the officials would prostrate themselves in front. And she was able to do that because her husband had died, and they had only one son, or the emperor had only one son, and that one son was with Cixi, and the son was 5 years old. So he couldn't rule, and Cixi then launched a coup and got rid of the regents, and she made herself the real regent. But conducting the pictures disappeared. Conducting of state affairs always behind the yellow silk screen.
She made a lot of things for women that you describe in the book. This is something that you have to describe.
Yes.
This is your grandmother's shoe.
Yes.
And this is a very painful process to get a foot little like this.
Yes. Well, you see, this is when I first got interested in Empress Dowager Cixi. More than 20 years ago, I was researching Wild Swans, my first book, the stories of my grandmother, my mother, and myself. And my grandmother had bound feet, and I saw her in pain, you know, she really brought us up. And then of course, I was growing up in communist China, and I thought Mao had banned foot binding. And then in my research, I realized it was the Empress Dowager who banned foot binding. So that made me interested in her in the first place.
First of all, why did they do that to women?
Well, you know, this practice lasted more than 1,000 years. Why? I mean, you know, the legend was men found women
running around,
sexy. No, they couldn't walk. You know, you could only hobble. You know, on this tiny, you know, the tiny sort of front toe, because the other 4 toes and the arch were crushed under a big stone. And the binding was there to stop the broken bones from recovering. And so women couldn't walk, you know, they couldn't run away, they were confined to their home. And I mean, there were sort of a sexual things. I mean, somehow these sort of people, all sorts of legends. But the fact is, for whatever reason, yes, they subjected women to this for more than 1,000 years. And yes.
What other interesting things that surprised you did you discover when you dig deep into this story about the...
Right. And I also I was amazed that under her, the young Mao Zedong, you know, I wrote a biography of Mao as my second book. When I was researching that book, I found that Mao had incredible freedom when he was growing up. He was a peasant lad, but he could easily get scholarships to go to college. He could go abroad to study if he wanted to. He could write for an incredibly free press, freer than today. I mean, he could travel with a girlfriend and check into hotels as husband and wife. And all this was something that I couldn't imagine having when I was growing up under Mao. So that struck me, and I got interested in her. And so after I finished the biography of Mao, I started to write a biography of her.
Because that was her improvement that had made this possible for Mao to grow up in this way.
Exactly, her reforms. She launched a coup and seized the power from the regent, you know, for her 5-year-old son in 1861. And it was after that China began modernization and China's door began to open. Because before that, China was completely isolated. And then she asked a very simple question. You know, why can't we keep the door of China open and do business with the West and benefit China itself? So she brought all this, you know, electricity, telegraphs, telephone, the railway, modern mining, modern industries, modern army and navy, and modern education, which is what is in practice in China today, brought in by her. Women's liberation, Western legal systems, and she abolished this medieval punishment called death by 1,000 cuts, which was slowly, slicing somebody to death, literally. All these things she abolished, and she brought in...
What did you find out about her love life? Because we have a picture where she is among eunuchs. And we will...
yes. Oh, right. In her world, in the Forbidden City and other palaces, the men there were only one emperor and the eunuchs. The others were eunuchs. And the eunuchs, you can see this, this is her as an old lady now, but in her younger days, in her late 20s and early 30s, she fell in love with a good-looking young eunuch, very much like one of them in the picture, but the result was tragic, because she wanted to very much to please her lover, and so she did something extremely dangerous, which is to send the eunuch out of the palace, because the eunuchs were confined to the Forbidden City, basically like a prisoner of the Forbidden City. But she, she wanted to give him a good time. She was also reforming China at the time, so she sent the eunuch abroad with an excuse. So he was able to go out of the Forbidden City, out of Beijing, to go on this great canal from Beijing to South China and celebrate his birthday on the barge, having a good time with music. And that just enraged all the grandees. And the population who'd never seen the eunuch. And so the grandees were furious, so they caught the eunuch and had him beheaded. And his corpse was exposed for 3 days. In medieval China, that was supposed to show that he had no, male organ. So because there was a rumor that he was having an affair with the Empress Dowager. And the Empress Dowager then suffered a nervous breakdown, which nearly killed her. I mean, she was really in love. After that, I think there is no record, no evidence that she had any other affair.
Your own story is also very interesting. And I know that your book, Wild Swans, has been translated into 30 languages. I think it's sold in more than 10 million copies. It's a very interesting transformation of a young woman, because you started out being very, Maoist, brought up in a family that were really on Mao's side, but then your father, he made some statements that cost your family a high price.
Well, the thing is, I was born in Mao's China. I grew up in Mao's China. I wouldn't say I was a Maoist, because that involves some positive thinking. I never thought it through. Mao was part of our life. He was like a god. When we were children, if we wanted to say what I say is absolutely true, we would say, I swear to Chairman Mao. So he was part of our life. And if our teachers want us to work hard, they would say, if you work hard, you will be able to go to Beijing to see Chairman Mao. So the purpose of my life was couched in Mao's name. And when I was 14, Mao launched his violent Cultural Revolution. And I was in Beijing to see Mao, making this pilgrimage. I was 14, and I didn't see Mao clearly. I was heartbroken. But it was also at that time that my faith in Mao began to wane, because then I could see all the atrocities, the violence, and they just went against my nature. My father, you mentioned, my father was a communist official. He had joined the communists when he was a teenager, and thinking that the communists would bring a good life to people in China. And in the Cultural Revolution, he spoke up against Mao's policies. And so my father was arrested, tortured, driven insane. He was exiled to a camp, and he died very tragically, prematurely. And my mother was under tremendous pressure to denounce my father. She refused. So she was put through over 100 of those ghastly denunciation meetings, which were everyday features of the Cultural Revolution. I don't know whether you saw pictures of those denunciation meetings. Basically, the victims would be stood on the stage, and their arms were ferociously twisted to the back, and their heads were ferociously pushed down, and they were kicked and beaten. And my mother was made to kneel on broken glass. She was paraded in the streets, and children spat at her and threw stones at her. She survived, and today she still lives in China. So that was good. And then, you know, when this happened to millions and millions of people in China, and then I rejected Mao's policies and Mao himself.
How come you were able to go abroad to study?
Because Mao died. He died in 1976, and China began to change. In 1978, for the first time, scholarships for going abroad were awarded on academic basis. And I sat for a national exam. I did reasonably well. So I was, I became one of the first group of 14 people to go and study in Britain. And I was extremely lucky. And when I arrived in Britain, you know, it was like another planet.
And now you live there, you're married there to,
Yes.
to an Englishman?
To half English, half Irish.
Okay, but not a Chinese.
Not
And
Chinese,
then
no.
you have said that you still have your heart in China.
Well, it's not, well, you know, I care about China. I care about the people there. And I wanted to, because I know the people have been through so much, and through my own experience, through the experience of my family, and after research, you know, of the Mao biography, and so I care about the fate of the people very much. I think that's what I really mean. Yes.
And you are Chinese.
And I'm Chinese,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Thank you so much for coming here and letting me show your grandmother's shows.
Yeah.
But that means that it has been a lot of pain among women and
Yes.
your people in China.
Absolutely, which is why I felt sympathy for the Empress Dowager, because she really launched women's liberation. She released them from the homes, she gave them education, and yet she's got terrible press, and which is so unfair.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting book.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ja, det handlade alltså om den sista kejsarinnan av Kina. Nu ska vi alldeles strax prata om Generation Ego. Det är titeln på en ny bok som beskriver de unga i Sverige som går i skolan idag. Det kom häromdagen, igår faktiskt, en ny PISA-rapport som också gav dåligt betyg åt svenska elever. Den här gången handlade det om digitalt problemlösning, och inte ens där platsade vi bland de främsta. Vi ska prata mer om den här generationen.